So, you wrote something problematic. Did you write enough in your story how much you disavow that problematic element? Shame on you. Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and lawyer streamer, and today I wanted to talk about this idea of the expectations and reality of being a writer and the contents that you put in your books and some of the discourse that I saw around there being like less than wonderful stuff in books and kind of just, I don't know, just to opine on maybe the bizarre nature of the community that's on the internet of books, that it's not, I don't feel like it is actually representative of generally normal people. No offense to the booktube and authortube community, but it just doesn't feel real to me. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. Number one way to be featured here is through the monthly prompt contest called Lamoy, where I give you a prompt. You write a short story about or inspired by the prompt. And then on the first Monday video of the month, we go through your creativity together and just have a great time. The other way is if you're an indie author with a book out or a book that is coming out, you can submit your first chapter and your cover. They'll be read here on the channel, and hopefully that will help more readers find your book. Because the hardest thing, there we go. The hardest thing in general for any of us is to just be spotted in the sea of books, especially with the rise of the AI garbage and opportunists. So and then the third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, they're available down in the description below as well. You can get them at any of your favorite places to get books, including your library upon request. So check it out. Support this guy, help feed him. All of your books help support this puppy dog's life. Look at that smile. You couldn't kill that, no, could you? Oh my gosh, what are you doing? Okay, and I think that's all of it. So, I'm not entirely sure how to go about this subject or like how I wanted to talk about it, but there is just this weird, every so often I like find a new person on YouTube that talks about books that I click into just to listen to how they talk about the books. And there is just such a bizarre culture. As somebody who got an MFA in creative writing and has been to conferences like AWP and have been around writers in that sort of normal writing space, including like normal crit groups with like a bunch of people in it, and having received feedback that and having read books from all over the place, the YouTube space and the internet space of books is so bizarre. So is the manner of critiquing and analyzing books sometimes. And I know that's hilarious because I also just talk about books, but I don't say I have the right opinion. I'm not trying to tell anybody that I have the right opinion. I mostly just try to air my thoughts on stuff like this, the conversations that I see, or I use my book reviews as a cope or just a way to discuss the experiences that I had with any given book. And I don't promise that my experience is the experience that anybody else is going to have, but that's what I do. But sometimes when you're looking at book reviews, I mean, it's always going to be very heavily painted with personal preference and personal likes and experience and what somebody's expectations are for an author, which is interesting to see how they talk about a book then with comparisons. Look at that. With comparisons to what their expectations are for authors. So the thing that I ran into this week, first I want to talk about commas. Super small thing, but first I want to mention commas, is that there is such a heavy criticism of authors' uses of commas on here. And number one, I'm sorry if this is your go-to critique for somebody's book, but it is the lowest form of book critique as somebody with an MFA. Commas and any other punctuation they're all just a way of kind of scoring your story. And we as writers also just write with pauses in our language where we naturally would pause, we as people. And so our books often sound like the way that we talk because we write like we talk. And one of the memories that I will never forget in really learning this was in the first semester for my MFA for creative writing and the fiction novel, because every semester we were required reading one fiction, one nonfiction, and one poetry for everybody. And then when we worked with our mentors, we created individual reading lists based on what our needs were and what we were looking to make. So the first fiction book that we were assigned for the group was Demonology by Rick Moody. And I remember reading that. It was a collection of short stories. And I remember reading that and going, what the frick is this? What is with all of the commas? I don't understand. And then since, it was the featured fiction book of the semester, Rick Moody came for a visit at the university. And he was a keynote speaker of sorts and did a reading and a lesson. And in listening to him talk, he punctuated the way that he spoke in the same way that he read. This was super obvious when we were listening to him do his reading. And then you got to follow exactly how he was talking with the way that the words were written on the page. And his comma usage matches the way that he talks naturally, where he inserts commas naturally. And so then you just go, oh, okay, so what is on the page is kind of just the way that he thinks. And so since then, I've paid even more attention to where I sort of place commas or the way that I arrange sentences, because I know that I arrange sentences kind of weird sometimes. And I can see the way that I talk. I may even have a little more self-reflection on that in general because I edit my own videos, so I have to listen to myself talk all the time. And then I help to also look at the way that I write my books, so I get to see how I write and how I talk on the fly all the time. So there's often when I'm watching critique videos that go after punctuation, I can't help but go, do you read very much literary fiction? Because what I'm seeing here is this critique of people not writing in a formal manner, like they're copywriting for a website. And the thing about fiction is you have so much freedom in how you construct a sentence, how you construct a book. There are so many fiction novels, especially in literary fiction, which I know is very much dissed upon by genre fiction readers, which, whatever, the elitism goes both ways for different reasons, but there are so many books that are considered literary fiction that write in non-linear or non-traditional or non-formal ways that even include not having punctuation very much at all, or by changing the way that punctuation is used. I know that Butcher Boy is like that. I know that Blood Meridian is like that. I know that Blood Meridian is a Western. I don't know if it's considered literary fiction. I know that the Color Purple is like that. I know there are so many different books that use non-traditional stylings in the narrations to play. I know that the Fight Club uses first person present most of the time, but sometimes it actually switches into second person because of the way that the perspective of the narrator is changing. So then storytelling and writing often get into this weird space of being so close-minded and so narrow that it has to be written in this very specific way, or else the author is an utter failure. And then since it's such a public platform, there's even more desire to just drag and muddy, and it discourages people from being playful, from trying different things. And then obviously the insult between different genres, when we can really just enjoy separate genres without being insulting. You also end up with the elitism between which tense and which perspective, because people associate specific perspectives or how many perspectives or whether you can follow perspectives as being high complexity or low complexity. But if you look at one of the previous videos I did where it was comparing what makes YA versus what makes adult literature, and one of them was, and it said, and the number of perspectives affects that. If you look at, again, Fight Club, it's one perspective. You're in the narrator's perspective the entire time. But I would not say that that book is not complex because it doesn't have a bunch of different people that you're following through their perspectives in this bigger world thing. There are so many different ways to experience a book that I think gets lost, especially with the number of people on YouTube who specifically read YA, romance, and erotica. I mean, look at how many authors on YouTube specifically write YA, romance, erotica, or a mixture of the three. This is kind of away from the what about the problematic. I said something about problematic at the very beginning, and you didn't chastise the idea enough to justify having it in your story. So this is something else that I think gets lost in the discussion and construction of book reviews or book analysis or just book talks, is just because something shows up in a book doesn't necessarily mean that the author knows that it's there. So earlier this week, and I know that's kind of might be a weird thing to say, but sometimes when I'm listening to book reviews, elements inside of them are taken as malicious or like they're outing the author for something. And yeah, you can learn a lot about an author based on the way that they write. However, it's not like a one-for-one that you can do that. If you assume that everything that is put in a book that you pick up on is done deliberately, then you're going to end up putting a morality expectation on the author to combat everything that you pick up that you think that the author put in there deliberately, because you're going to see stuff that you might think is destructive or bad or toxic or evil that they might not think of it in that way, because it's just part of the fundamental way in which they speak. This goes back to kind of the commas thing, where you insert stuff without really necessarily thinking of it or realizing it. So one of these things would be like, if I went back to his name is Augustine, there are so many like really weird sexual conversations and like setups and references in there. I don't know if the author put those in there very specifically to have this really bizarre sexual relationship within the undercurrent of the secret society, or if that was part of her background or her upbringing in some way that made this seem very casual. You could make assumptions in the same way that people will look at a character who is some kind of ist or says something in a certain way, and then they will accuse you of being some sort of ist instead of recognizing that that might just be a character trait, because there is this assumed malice in every single choice in a story, or this assumed awareness of every single thing in a story, where an author may not have the same awareness or the same sensitivities as a reader, because for every reader, we bring our own perspective and our own experiences and the way that we see the world into the interpretation that we have of the book, just as the author brings in their own interpretation and history and experiences into the way that they've crafted the book and the elements that will stand out to them. Another good way to point this out is when Alex and I did a book review together for Shadow of the Conqueror. And I know that when I read stories, I focus on the character. I'm a character reader. I enjoy watching characters grow, character decisions, and I look for the character logic and who they are, how they came to be how they are, and how they make decisions / how that works with who they are as a person. So I'm always watching the character logic specifically. And I know that a lot of other people are not character authors, in fact, or character readers, and they want the plot, especially in sci-fi fantasy. Now, so the entire time I'm reading Shadow of the Conqueror, or pretty much most books, I'm discarding a lot that is not related to character because I'm interested in the character studies. And so then when I was going through Shadow of the Conqueror, I didn't find it important for me to keep in my head as I was going any of the areas where it was heavy world building logic, heavy mathematics, because it had sections of mathematics, engineering, logic, where it was talking about the ships, where it was talking about the floating islands. I just kind of let all of that come in and go out because I didn't really care. However, when I was talking to Alex, that's something that really, really stuck out to him, enough that he wanted to mention. He mentioned it both in his individual book review and in our joint book review, because he's an engineer. And so all of those passages really, really stuck out to him. And it's not because either of us was reading it more or less correctly. It's because we bring our own experiences and our own attention to detail and what we find important to the way that we read. And then we're going to read in differently into what we're seeing. And this is also why some people may read the same passage as malicious while other people won't, because maybe they've been burned, maybe they take things a little bit more seriously than other people, maybe they've had specific experiences that make them go, I can't look at that any other way. Like, I know that I can't read stuff like His Name Was Augustine and ignore the weird sexual relationship between all these characters. I can't ignore that Hans was dating Swanee's mother while she was pregnant with Swanee, and then knew that Swanee, the baby in the belly, was going to be Hans's future wife. So then Hans was Swanee's dad's assistant, and Swanee grew up with Hans right there. And then later, when she was 21, married this guy 30 years her senior, who was there when she was born and all growing up, and was the one that helped awaken her her abilities and had phrases like, "Don't tell your father that I showed you this," I can't overlook how much that looks like grooming. However, some people, I would assume the people that read paranormal romance, can overlook that kind of thing because I think that it is fairly common in that genre. But I know that I can't divorce myself enough from how characters work and how people work for me to absorb that through the genre conventions. Now, do I think that that was specifically put in there in a way because the author is pro-grooming or into grooming or has to validate or condemn the obvious grooming in the story? No, because she may not necessarily, one, know that that's weird and put it in there. She might not have the idea how weird that looks, or it may have been done on purpose to make the Teuton Society look bad, and in which case you don't have to combat the negativity in your own stories. Another story that had some questionable stuff in it was Guns and Smoke by Abby and Lauren, and one of the most questionable things in there was the amount of exhibitionism in there, to the point that they were sharing a hotel room with Jesse's 10-year-old brother, and they were so hot for each other, like this was porno levels of thirst, that they were like, let's go back to the room and have sex. Don't worry about the kid. He sleeps like a rock, so we can have sex in front of him. I don't know if the authors realized the amount of exhibitionism that was done in front of that child, to the point that he gets to the end of the story and he sees the two of them kissing and he's like, I'm not even bothered by this anymore. When he's watched them grope each other, when he's watched them thirst for each other, when he's watched them basically discuss their heat for each other throughout the book, and so then now at the end he's like, meh, it's okay. At least you're not having sex in front of me. Or Bonnie talking to the 10-year-old about having a morning after pill, basically a morning after tea, because she doesn't want to have her own child, and basically telling that the child in the book, the only child in the book, that she doesn't want to have her own, so she's going to kill any chance of that happening now via this morning after tea. That's brutal, but I don't think that the authors did that on purpose in a way to be creepy or mean or anti-child, because Jesse has a child. But I think that there are things that slip through the relationships of characters or in the narrative of characters that's not always caught by the author, especially not until they've written multiple books and they've had people who don't know them read the books and then point out these things. I know that Grady Hendrix reads to me like he's got severe mommy issues, because out of the 2 books that I remember reading, since I read Horror Story years ago and I don't remember much about it at all, the more recent books that I've read both had to do with humiliating women and urine all over women, and in my best friend's exorcism there was the drinking of urine. And I think there is more of this in the Final Girls Club. So, mommy issues. Now, do I think that he did this on purpose? Maybe, maybe not. There's a whole host of psychological things that are going into the underpinning of a story. So, how does it get back to you've written something problematic, yet you didn't condone it enough in the story? So recently and over time, I've seen a couple of different reviewers talk about these problematic elements or toxic elements inside of books and how the author didn't do enough to combat or wag the finger at these negative aspects in a book to show that they don't condone those behaviors. Number one, I don't think it's a book's job to tell you what the author's beliefs are. I think that you can start seeing into ideas that the author believes through reading their books, but again, it's not one for one, and sometimes you really have to analyze, and you need to not make assumptions or accusations about the person without really understanding who they are, because you can get into really dangerous territory, and none of us should be required to only write moral characters and to tell you where we stand. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten annoyed by reading a book that feels like it has to moralize and wag the finger at me as the reader and like congratulate the correct opinions within the text while demonizing and attacking the worst opinions in the text. And this also goes in hand with making your villains like all of the bad things that you can possibly think, and then also slapping maybe your real life enemy ideas onto that person. Now, sometimes people absolutely create straw men in their books so that they can just attack and try to make their enemies look stupid in this completely controlled environment. But that's not true for everything. So if a story contains like really weird romantic relationships or a fundamentalist underpinning or undercurrent of how these relationships work, it may not have been inserted in there as a way to talk about certain subjects. It might just be in there because that is just part of the author's psychology and they don't even know that they're doing it. So here's what it comes down to. If a book contains problematic whatever, I don't believe that it is the author's job to condemn or explore or deconstruct these ideas. And I think it might be a little too much to even assume that the author is aware that those elements are in there. I feel like we're in this really weird place where there's this non-theistic fundamentalism that is taking over so many different aspects of life, which includes writing books, where you're told now that you have to write a book in this certain way, and that includes condemning these behaviors, and if you have these other things that show up in your books, you need to make sure that the reader knows that you don't hold those ideas, or else it's just going to be assumed that you are the characters in the book and that these are your ideas, instead of just experiencing the book. And this is where I'm talking about. There is this weird perspective here on YouTube. I don't know where else it is, because obviously YouTube is like one of the most open places in which you can get book reviews. But even the book reviews on Goodreads aren't quite as serious and personal as the ones on YouTube, where there are assumptions that the author is the character. I've had people assume that Joey's personality or choices are mine, like her opinion on Baltimore is mine, but she is just her own person with her own beliefs. So I've seen other people accredit different character traits to the author across different series all over the place. And so maybe those things are related to the author, but maybe they're not. But I just don't understand this level of fundamentalism, and I don't know whatever else to call it, so let me know if you have an idea. But it's this idea of having to only have certain morals in the story. If these characters have any failings that fall out of those morals, they have to be punished, and there probably is no coming back. Because even in places where I've seen, like, The Black Witch, where she starts out a bad person or prejudiced or whatever, and the story goes to change her prejudice, where it said that's not enough, she doesn't deserve to go and get changed, she doesn't deserve a redemption arc. It reminds me a lot of being condemned by Orthodox Christians for saying that I enjoy reading horror or I enjoy horror stories. It's, you're only allowed to enjoy these certain things, you must moralize your writing, you must push forward the church in everything that you do. And that's why I say that it feels like there is this non-theistic fundamentalism that is taking over and saying you must write books in this certain way or you will be hunted down, you will be kicked out. And it takes the ideas from the stories, the characters from the stories that very well may not be perfect, and either requires you to finger wag at your own characters and tell the audience that you know better, instead of letting them just experience the story, or it's going to be assumed that you support those things, and so now it's time to cancel the person. I gotta tell you, I read so vastly between so much stuff. I'm actually getting ready to maybe start doing series of book reviews, where it's just a compilation of maybe books that I've read that I don't want to do longer book reviews on, and I can just talk about, I read this were my thoughts on it. And so I can mush a couple of those together because I don't want to do a deep dive into every single book that I read. So varying that a little bit. But I read so vastly with such different people. Right now I'm reading The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis, and it's partially autobiographical and it's partially fiction. And Bret is not at all a perfect person in it. He even has a portion in there where he goes, so what if Terry was a predator? Because this guy is like 40-something, picking up him as a 17-year-old and lied to him about, hey, come to this hotel and we can discuss you writing a script, and instead it was Terry wanting to have sex with the 17-year-old under the guise that it was, oh, I might give you a job in Hollywood, and he's obviously done this to other kids before, other people before, and that's just how show business is, and that's just how Hollywood is. And there's no fighting these people, there's no moralizing, there's no anything in this, because in a lot of situations in real life, people are not like that. So you just live with people working through their circumstances in less than perfect situations, and it can't be accredited really to the author's personal failings. I mean, this probably could be at the time because it's autobiographical, but even then we're still reading a story, so I'm going to take it as a story, and maybe that's my own failing as well as just being a reader that reads. But I don't know. I feel like there's just such this insane pressure on authors now to be excessively aware of everything that you're putting in a story, of every segment of your own psychology that comes off and goes into the way that you write, and that you somehow have to have the same morals and experiences of your readers who are going to be taking your books and then being irritated by the things that you say. I've used words in my books in totally benign ways that when somebody else read them, they said, hey, wait, that word is offensive to me. And it's so weird. I don't know. I don't fully know what I'm trying to say, other than there are just so many ways to read books that are so... Sometimes when I'm listening to other people talk about books, I don't know if I'm even human anymore. I don't know what to... That's why I used to call myself a robot, is sometimes, well, partially. Sometimes I just feel so disassociated from other people because of the way that they look at things and the lack of compassion, or the lack of chance, or the lack of thinking. Because we look at books, at least I look at books, as a way to see life through somebody else's eyes, not my own. I'm not trying to insert myself into a story. I'm trying to see the life and the world through however somebody else sees it. Yet, a lot of the time, I keep seeing people that read books expecting their morals to be reflected in the narrative, and the condemnations that they have of certain behaviors to be reflected in the narrative. And I don't understand holding authors to this standard of having to understand every little element that they put in their book that may even be subconscious, or to condemn dark behaviors or dark actions that happen in a book within the book. Can we just experience the story for what it's trying to do and then say whether we liked it or not? I can tell you, I can understand why The Shards has so much benign sexual description in it, because that's just the way that Bret Easton Ellis, one, writes, and two, it's very I feel like it's very male. Because you hear that men are very visual creatures. So you're like listening to this teenage boy talk about life, and there's so much just benign sexual content. Especially, I feel like I should say especially for, I should say it feels especially like, okay, I could see this for somebody who has grown up in this Hollywood scene surrounded by drugs and sex and all of this behavior that is in the Hollywood area. But I'm just there for the ride. Now, I can say I see why this is done the way that it is, and I still don't like it, without making it a condemnation of the author. But it feels like more and more, so many in the public forum don't do that. And then there's this pressure to conform to the certain way of writing, to have these certain mannerisms, instead of just getting to live your story the way that the story needs to be to live, you know? And that is why I will die an unpopular virgin. So that's the video. I don't know. I think I just wanted to talk about the way that I felt public book reviews and book discussions go with moralizing the choices in the story that may not be obvious to the author, and just like, what is this? Again, it just felt so weird to me to be watching this book review and somebody go, I felt this issue was problematic, but I don't feel like the story actually used it enough to show that the author realized that it was problematic. The author may not have known that it was even in there. It might just be a part of who they are and how they grow up, because people are both simple and complex creatures, honestly. But my question then goes to you guys. What responsibility do you think authors have in the way that they write stories, or the way they understand their own content, or the way that others understand their content? I mean, there are even the situations where somebody writes a story that is maybe based off of their own experiences with something, and then they're told that it is not an accurate portrayal of that thing, even when it's based off of their own experiences, and how that can be problematic. So what responsibility do you think authors have when including stuff that might be problematic, or might be toxic, or might be dark, or might be personal? And what responsibility do you think that reviewers also have when it comes to reading book reviews? Because we spend so much time talking about the authors and what the authors are putting out, but we're never spending time talking about the way that readers and reviewers specifically respond to the author's work. And is there a time in which public reviewers can be more irresponsible than the book writers that they are opining against? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend and don't die. Hello, boomers! My name is Yanananana. How are you feeling today? In case you didn't know, I'm a YouTuber from Nide, a small town in eastern Ukraine. My family has never really understood what I do in the woods, but all I've ever wanted is to make a better life for us all. Papa always comes home from the mines dirty, angry, and tired. It's a necessary evil to do your job and be in a place that you don't want to be. But I've never wanted to spend my life doing exactly what was necessary of me. Everything changed for me when a couple of Americans appeared at my door. They said they wanted to sponsor my channel and handed me military-grade explosives. Can you believe it? Military-grade. The lights will be incredible going forward. With this help, my videos will be next level. I just hope they are as they say, and this isn't some kind of trick. I mean, what would there be to gain? Boris says people are simple. Everything comes down to money and power. And Alex tells me ignorance will not save me from trouble. I understand where they are coming from, but I do not like to think that way. There is more to life than a cruel of superficial goods, hatred, and destruction. Anyway, I do not like where this video is going, so I will see you on the explosives field. Boom, boom, boom. Salute.